I invited him into my home, and within moments, he took out his tool. I was taken aback by its size. I had never seen anything quite like it before. I am a quiet woman, one who finds solace in the routines of daily life. The predictable rhythm of my existence has always been my sanctuary. I wake up at the same hour each morning, brew a delicate cup of tea, and watch the world awaken through my kitchen window. I take comfort in the way the sunlight filters through the lace curtains, casting intricate patterns upon the wooden floor. My life is orderly, my world serene. But today, that tranquility was disrupted. It started with a simple phone call. A deep, assured voice on the other end told me he would be arriving within the hour. I had nearly forgotten about the appointment I had made days prior, a necessary but unwelcome intrusion into my peaceful world. A leaky pipe in the kitchen, a minor inconvenience, had made his visit inevitable. I assured him I would be home and hung up, my fingers lingering on the receiver, a strange unease settling in my chest. When he arrived, he was taller than I expected, his frame solid, his presence undeniable. His eyes, sharp and perceptive, took in his surroundings with an air of quiet confidence. He stepped inside, bringing with him the scent of rain-soaked pavement and something else, something I couldn't quite place. I led him to the kitchen, gesturing toward the offending pipe beneath the sink. And then he took out his tool. I watched as he knelt, his movements precise and efficient. The metal gleamed under the kitchen light, and I felt an odd tightness in my throat. There was something so assured, so deliberate about the way he worked, as if this act of repair was more than just a mundane task to him. I folded my hands in front of me, unsure of what to do with myself. Silence stretched between us, thick with something unspoken. The rhythmic clinking of metal against metal filled the air, a sound that should have been ordinary but, in that moment, felt charged with something more. I found my gaze lingering on the curve of his forearms, the way the fabric of his shirt stretched taut over his back as he moved. I had never paid attention to such details before, never allowed my mind to wander down such paths. And yet, here I was, standing in my own kitchen, feeling like an interloper in my own carefully constructed world. Minutes passed, perhaps longer than they should have, and finally, he exhaled, straightening up. "That should do it," he said, his voice breaking the spell. He tested the faucet, letting the water run clear and strong. I swallowed, nodding. "Thank you." He wiped his hands on a cloth, his gaze meeting mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was no trouble. And then, just as quickly as he had arrived, he was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of rain and a lingering sense of something I couldn't quite name. I stood there for a long time after, staring at the now silent faucet, the weight of the moment pressing upon me. This was just a routine repair, nothing more. And yet, something within me had shifted. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to understand. Part 2. A morning of solitude. It was a warm, sunlit morning. As usual, I was alone at home, tending to my household chores, sweeping, tidying, organizing, cleaning. With my husband at work and my children at school, I relished these quiet hours, using them as a time of reflection, a form of therapy even. I turned up the music, allowing it to fill the house as I moved through the rooms, the melodies dictating the rhythm of my emotions. It was a ritual, a moment of personal joy. I was so immersed in this morning reverie that I didn't hear the doorbell. Draped in a simple towel, I continued my tasks, oblivious to the world outside. The sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust particles as they danced in the air. I was unaware that someone was watching me. Nathan, an old friend of my husband's, had stopped by to return the power drill he had borrowed. He had called a few times with no response, so he decided to drop it off in person. When he arrived and heard the music playing, he assumed I was home. After knocking and receiving no answer, he made his way around the house to the backyard, intending to leave the tool by the patio. That's when he saw me. For a long moment, Nathan stood frozen outside the dining room window, watching me. As I swayed to the music, utterly unguarded. Perhaps it was the contrast that caught his attention. the woman he had always known to be reserved, graceful, composed, now moving freely, lost in her own world. There was something undeniably intimate about the scene, and he lingered longer than he should have. The room was dimly lit, bathed in the golden hues of the late afternoon sun filtering through sheer curtains. Shadows stretched lazily across the floor, undulating with my movements. I had let my hair down, the soft waves cascading over my shoulders as I spun in slow, rhythmic circles. The melody, something light and wistful, had carried me away, dissolving the barriers I so carefully maintained. I don't know how long he had been standing there before I finally sensed it, the weight of his gaze pressing through the glass, prickling along my skin. When I turned, my heart leapt into my throat. The adrenaline shot through me like an electric current. My first instinct was to cover myself, as though my light summer attire, a thin camisole and linen shorts, was somehow inadequate, exposing a side of me that was meant to remain unseen. A rush of heat spread across my cheeks, embarrassment mingling with something else, something unspoken. I hurriedly pulled a robe from the back of a chair, wrapping it around myself before stepping onto the patio, my pulse still racing. Nathan stood near the edge of the wooden deck, the power drill resting idly at his feet. The soft hum of cicadas filled the silence between us, the air thick with a scent of freshly cut grass and something deeper, something charged. "Nathan, what were you doing at the window?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. His lips parted, then hesitated, as if weighing his words. Finally, he exhaled, offering a sheepish smile. "I knocked, but you didn't hear me." The music was loud, and for a second, I thought something might be wrong. He gestured vaguely toward the open door. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." His explanation was logical, even thoughtful. And yet, something in his expression unsettled me. It wasn't just concern I saw there, it was something else. Something raw. A quiet fascination that lingered even now, an intensity that sent a shiver through me despite the warm air. I swallowed, forcing a small laugh. "Well, as you can see, I was just enjoying the moment." Nathan nodded slowly, but his eyes never left mine. For a brief second, I wondered what he had seen, what version of me had been reflected in that window, and why he had found it so hard to look away. "You looked like a burglar, lurking outside my window like that." He chuckled, though there was something strained in his laughter. The moment lingered between us, thick with unspoken meaning, like the oppressive summer air pressing against the glass panes. A pause stretched long enough for discomfort to creep in, and perhaps sensing it, he broke the silence with a suggestion. "Let's have a drink. Something cool to take the edge off this heat." I hesitated, my fingers tightening slightly around the doorframe. A part of me knew better than to prolong this moment, yet another part, one I barely recognized, was compelled to stay. "All right, just a glass of juice." Inside, the ceiling fan hummed softly, stirring the warm air, but offering little relief. I poured 2 glasses of orange juice, the clinking of ice against glass unnervingly loud in the quiet room. He took his seat on the couch, sinking into it as though he had always belonged there. His gaze was steady, unreadable, watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. As he took a sip, he finally spoke. "I never knew you were like this." I frowned slightly. "Like what?" "So uninhibited. Carefree. It's different from how I've always seen you." His words unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I had spent years curating an image, reserved, composed, the perfect wife. But here, under the weight of his stare, I felt exposed. The compliment, if it was one, left an unexpected warmth curling in my stomach, mingling with something dangerously close to exhilaration. "You're exaggerating," I said lightly, attempting to dispel whatever tension was weaving itself into the air between us. "I'm not." His voice was softer now, more certain. "There was something about you just now." He didn't finish his thought, but he didn't have to. The meaning was there, hanging between us like the unsaid words neither of us dared voice. I should have ended the conversation. I should have laughed it off, redirected the moment, reclaim the safe distance that had always existed between us. But I didn't. Instead, I remained, acutely aware of the slow, steady thrum of my pulse. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a fleeting moment, a trick of the summer heat. But the way my breath hitched, the way my fingers trembled ever so slightly around my glass, I knew better. As Nathan stood to leave, the air between us felt charged, a silent storm brewing in the unspoken words and lingering glances. My pulse quickened, my breath catching in my throat as he hesitated, his fingers clenching and unclenching at his sides. Then, before I could react, he closed the distance between us. His lips met mine in a whisper of a kiss, soft yet urgent, hesitant yet filled with an unspoken need. For a heartbeat, I was frozen, caught between shock and something far more dangerous, desire. My lips parted slightly, responding before my mind could catch up, before logic could remind me of the consequences. And then, like a wave crashing against jagged rocks, reality hit. I pulled away, a sharp intake of breath shuddering through me. My mind raced, scrambling for reason, for clarity, for something to anchor me as the room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. What had I done? Nathan immediately stepped back, his eyes wide, regret etching deep into his expression. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice hoarse. I don't know what came over me. I said nothing, still drowning in the aftermath of the moment. The weight of guilt settled heavily on my chest, suffocating, relentless. I had never been unfaithful, never even entertained the idea. And yet, in that fleeting second, something within me had cracked open. Something raw, something irreparable. Desperate for something tangible, something familiar. My fingers found the small bracelet resting on the table, a childhood keepsake, a reminder of innocence and simpler times. Without thinking, I pressed it into Nathan's hand, my fingers brushing against his in a silent plea for understanding, for peace, for something neither of us could name. He looked down at it, then at me, his expression torn. Slowly, his fingers curled around the bracelet, holding onto it like a lifeline. I should go, he murmured. I nodded, unable to trust my voice, afraid that if I spoke, my resolve would shatter. The door closed behind him with a soft click, yet the sound echoed like a thunderclap in my mind. I sat down heavily on the couch, my fingers tracing my lips where his had just been, the memory still burning against my skin. The music that had played so sweetly in the background now seemed distant, a mere ghost of the moment that had just unraveled. Guilt gnawed at me, sinking its claws deep. But beneath it, something else simmered, something I dared not name. A longing, an ache, a quiet, insidious awakening that refused to be ignored. In the days that followed, I found myself drifting through moments, lost in thought, replaying that single, forbidden instant over and over. I avoided Nathan when he visited my husband, retreating into silence, into the safety of distance. But distance was a cruel illusion. Every stolen glance, every fleeting second where our eyes met and quickly looked away, only deepened the rift of uncertainty, of unfinished business, of something neither of us had the courage to face. It was a secret we both carried, a weight that settled in the space between us. And though I told myself it was the end, I feared, no, I knew, it was only the beginning.